So we're good to go now. Thank you.
We can now officially call the meeting to order. We just want to remind, for all those that just jumped on, I think, James, you might have missed it. We're in a new world of Zoom, and it's a public meeting, so we have to keep our cameras on. And if you have to turn it off for any reason, have to excuse yourself, just make the announcement so we can keep the public informed of what's happening.
Hi, Sophia.
All right, and we can officially, I think I officially called the meeting to order, but we're recording. If you can give it 1 second.
No, we're all set.
We are recording.
Yep. Your finger, okay? Okay. So one more time, I'm gonna officially call this meeting to order. Everybody's here. Hey, how you doing? This is the Mayoral Ad Hoc Committee on Equity and Diversity. And it's 5:32 on August 19th. And we'll just give introductions. I'm Aisha Hall. I'm a citizen of Lewiston. I am the chair of this committee. We'll pass it on to Mark, and you can pass it. And I hear some feedback, so I'll mute as we're not talking.
All right, thank you. My name is Mark Kerr. I'm the mayor of Lewiston. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this ad hoc committee. And I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Citizen of Lewiston, former Lewiston police officer. Brian.
I'm Brian O'Malley. I'm the police chief here in Lewiston. Tanya.
Thanks. Tanya Bailey Curry, citizen of Lewiston, licensed clinical social worker. Sorry, Stephanie.
I am Stephanie Gelinas, City Councilor, Ward 7. Dennis.
Hi, Dennis Dote, City Administrator for the City of Lewiston. I'll turn it over to Marcella.
Marcella Paris, the Library Director, Lewiston Public Library, and I will pass it to Dane.
Morgan, local realtor, and lover of Lewiston, I guess. Passing it to, actually, did Dale go? Yeah, Dale.
I don't know where Dale is. He disappeared.
Dale's disappearing. Luke or James? We'll go James.
You're on mute.
James Ford, Family and Community Support Coordinator for Lewiston Public Schools, and I'll pass to Luke.
Luke Jensen, Ward 5 City Councilor, and I'll pass it to Dale.
I'm Dale Dowdy. I'm the Deputy City Administrator. In just a moment, Sophia Khalid will be joining us. She couldn't find her link, so we're generating her new one. So she should be on any moment, okay?
Thank you. Are we gonna pass it to, oh, did everyone introduce themselves again? All right, so we're waiting.
I think we're good to go, Aisha. I think we can start.
Okay, so we're just going to review and discuss the presentation we did last, or O'Malley did last week. We were going to read, come back. So if anyone has any comments to open up, this is the time for that.
Aisha,
yes.
If I can just jump in too, we do have the presentation. I spoke with Dale prior to, he's prepared to share that on his screen just again, if there is, just as a guide of kind of what was covered last or 2 weeks ago. So if you're looking for to bring it up at any point, I just want you to know that that is teed up and available should we need to as a refresher.
How does everybody feel about putting that up now? Because it is worth refreshing.
There was, I had a question on some language that was used in, I
Yep.
can't remember the part, so, but I know there was quite a bit. It was towards the end though.
So how about, is it too much to bring up the slides and go through them? And then if we have questions, open it up that way? Make this a collective effort, because I have questions too, but I can't remember where they are in the presentation. So that would be helpful.
Okay. Dale, can you?
Yep, Chief O'Malley has that. He'll cue that right up right now.
Perfect.
Hi, Sophia.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So Chief O'Malley is queuing up the presentation from last week. And while he's doing that, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, Sophia Khalid, Ward 1 City Councilor.
All right, so we're at the, excuse me, this is the first slide. I can just scroll through this, or if there's something in particular that you knew you want to look at, Tanya, or?
Yeah, if I remember right, and I'm probably gonna mess it up, but it was,
Is that what it was pertaining to?
I think so. It was the word shall, like there were some guidelines that were suggested for officers to use, but it was like oh gosh.
Oh, Tanya, was that around when an officer's identifying himself and instructing? Was that the component, you think?
It might have been reasonable.
Another where he's asking a person to comply.
It might have been, yeah.
Mid to late in the presentation, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Tanya, I'm glad you brought up like the language, because some of my thoughts are, we have a short amount of time. It is what it is. We have a short amount of time, and we would want to be focused about what we're looking at too.
Yeah, can you go back once? I'm sorry, Aisha. Can you go back one slide?
No, you're fine.
Oh, no, that wasn't it. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Tanya, could it have been in the actual documents? Because these are summaries of the documents that we had to look through.
No, I remember it wasn't, and it's my fault. I actually wrote it down. It's just I had asked, I asked Chief O'Malley something else, and then I forgot to go back to that. But what if, it was like, it's wordsmithing, but there was a suggestion after that says that something the officer must adhere to. But before it had said something like should or shall. And I was like, maybe if that said.
So there's a shall in that one. And then there was a shall, Chief, just go back one. And then there was a shall like 6 or 7. You're going through them kind of quick. So that one's upon firing an officer shall energize.
Sure. Yeah, that one.
Well, that's on the taser. I mean.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I
didn't know if you knew in what instance.
Yeah, that would help.
Taser, firearms.
I thought it was, I don't think it was using a device. I thought it was just in the engagement. It might have been in de-escalation. It's my fault. I wrote it down and now I can't find where I wrote it.
Well, de-escalation was right at the beginning.
I wonder, Chief, and Aisha, if you're okay with this, I wonder if Chief, not to go through it like you did the last time, but just each page, just stay a little bit longer and just quickly remind us what that's about, but then quickly move on. That might generate other questions from folks.
Okay, well, here's
Thank you, Mark.
I know it's hard for me to see the screen when I've got.
Yeah.
This is a de-escalation directive.
Okay.
Is it this, an officer shall attempt to slow down?
No, because that makes sense. I mean, that's
Okay.
obviously dependent on what's happening, and I get that.
I mean, but I thought you said something was at the end. I was just trying to, Mark, Mayor, I was just trying to get down to the end of it to see if we could find it, but.
No,
Yeah.
and I understand, but I think other people we may generate other questions. So
Okay.
might as well do it once, and then eventually we're going to get to Tanya's.
Exactly.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah.
While we're on this slide, though, Chief O'Malley, if you don't mind, even in that case, is there a reason that we say shall instead of must? You know, just because shall is it's ambiguous almost. And this could be me not being an officer, but is there a reason that we don't say must?
Well, I think we have to, every situation is different. So I think that's, you know, you're gonna, I think shall is being used, you should try to attempt to, but
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to say must. I mean, if that's one of the, you know, because this one says shall attempt to slow down, reduce the intensity or stabilize the situation as more options or resources become available. I mean, when circumstances and time permit, an officer shall take those reasonable and prudent actions, which, I mean, if they're able to safely, I mean, that's what they have to do. They have to do those things. So
yeah, and this could just be
I'm not
me.
really sure.
Again, this could just be, I could be wordsmithing for no reason here, and please, anybody else jump in and say so if so. I'm just thinking because it's worded where circumstances and time reasonably permit.
And I think that's how shall is used throughout all of this.
Okay.
You know, with that caveat there of where circumstances and time reasonably permit.
Okay.
As we go through all of these.
Okay.
I just want to say to support the question, and like when we're looking at policy, we're looking at how things are worded and how, and it's hard to say just those underlying things or beliefs that we have. So Tanya, I appreciate you having a perspective about that, because that's really, we don't have time to go through and pick through as much as we would like to right now, but we need to think about those things, like how things are said, how these policies are worded, are the objective versus subjective things in the policies, in order to make recommendations going forward. So I just wanted to I support your question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the explanation. If I was reading it, and I'm not an officer, but if I was reading it, because I see the beginning where circumstances and time reasonably permit, I would know, like, obviously different circumstances are going to change what may happen. But if the expectation is that they should, I was thinking if you change that to must, would that be more of a, like, this is the standard if it's safe?
Well, it is the standard. I think even in other sections, you know, part of it where an officer shall do this as long as it, you know, safely can do this. You know, there's a couple other instances there. So I think that's the way it's interpreted, and that's the way it's written, and that's the way it's taught.
Gotcha. Okay.
I can continue through these, Mayor?
Yeah, please do.
Unless anybody has any questions on this portion or any comments on this, like we can go section by section in that way. Go ahead, Andrew.
I think just for a clarification, in most policies, shall or may gives the officer discretion. When it says must, he has to do it every time. And because that there's so many variations to each incident, you need to have that flexibility.
I agree with that.
Thank you.
That's the wordage. Okay, so this is the de-escalation that we continue through here. Then this is the duty to intervene. And this is kind of the same thing here at the earliest safe opportunity to prevent or stop the use of unreasonable force by another officer, and then immediately report it to a supervisor. So again, I mean, there's a couple different areas throughout these policies where it kind of has this kind of, you know, safely able to do those things.
Sure.
And then this is more of a definition of the situational use of force. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions on that. Okay. That sounds like the mayor. Hearing none, I'll move on to the next slide. Verbal direction. I mean, this is more of a training part of it. You know, we would prefer that everything could be solved just by talking calmly to people. You know, just the mere presence of an officer showing up, unfortunately, that doesn't always work.
Mhm.
And then this, the less than lethal force, this slide, this was more of talking about the law. 17A, I explained that 2 weeks ago. This is main law here. And of course, this is considerations that should be, officers should consider before they have to use any type of force.
Chief, on the policies that come out of the main chiefs, are those mandatory, or can you add things to make it fit your department?
What's mandatory is you have to, the Maine Criminal Justice Academy puts out what you have to have mandatory for policies addressing certain, you know, use of force. There is a duty to intervene. I believe they've added that. You know, pursuits, there's things like that. You have to have a policy that addresses all that, and they say that it has to meet this certain criteria. So what the Maine Chiefs has done is, if they've created the policies that match the requirements from the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, and our policies all do that.
And you can add to it, but you can't take away from it. Is that correct?
I can add to I could take things away from my policies, but I couldn't say, okay, I'm not going to have a duty to intervene policy anymore, because that's a requirement from the Maine Criminal Justice Academy.
Okay, thank you.
And then this is, you know, the definitions, deadly force, and talks about the warning. And then see, again, it says if possible, you know, multiple times. So it's not a must, but it's more of a shall.
Okay.
And then this talks about, and I talked about this 2 weeks ago as well, where it's the imminent use of deadly force. And again, this is state law that we've copied our policy from. And I talked about how other sections of the country are changing their use of force, or their authorization of deadly force to mimic this, the imminent use, which says a lot for what we're doing already, that other parts of the country are changing their policies or their laws to match what we already have here in the state of Maine. And this is just a continuation of the state law regarding the use of force, deadly force.
Questionnaire. Question. Chief, how do we qualify how an officer's inherent biases may affect his or her objectivity in a situation? So I guess this is my question. I know we're talking about equity and inclusion, and this, you know, a lot of the policies they seem to be a bit more transactional, and we know that these situations aren't really transactional. So how do we qualify that in this sense? Because that's really the issue that we're talking about, I guess.
In terms of them using deadly force?
Well, force in general. I mean, deadly force is I mean, the end, but there's a lot of steps that get you to that point. How do we qualify, you know, how do we know, you know, with our officers, how do we know, you know, where they're coming from? How do we know that they're operating in a space of objectivity that allows us to feel comfortable, or allows the people to feel comfortable enough to to know that we're operating in their best interest.
Well, that's what we strive for, Mr. Morgan, is, you know, that when we do our background on officers, we do psychological exams, we do polygraph exams. We have policies in place in terms of, you know, bias, no profiling. We don't allow that. So we strive to do that through our training and through our selection process. You know, through our interaction with people every day. You know, we do have what's called a personal early warning system. If we see certain officers with issues at work, with using uses of force or response to resistance, sick time, if their co-workers pick up on things, that all goes into play in terms of us selecting officers that are going to do the best job we can out there. You know, can I say that people don't have bias? No, I'm not going to say that. You know, we've done training on explicit and implicit bias. We all have implicit biases that we all need to strive to contain and work on and be aware of. We have policies in terms of, you know, explicit bias. You know, if we're having people on their social media platforms or things like that, we do have policies that restrict that or prevent that we can address through discipline up to including termination. So we strive to make sure that that doesn't come into play when they're dealing with people, but obviously implicit bias is something that we all need to work on. I don't know if that answers your question. It probably doesn't, but.
Not fully, but we'll get there. That's why we're here.
Can I also say, and all of us are in this together, so correct me if I'm saying something wrong, is that we're getting to that piece. We're looking at the policy, we're reviewing the policy. Of course, we got to move from the policy to the procedure and training, and then to the practices. This is a process, and it may not be a process that we can chew all the way until, I don't know what the timeline looks like, but we got to make sure that we're sticking to that part. And yes, we're anxious to get to that piece, but we are reviewing the policy. So if we can figure out some ways we can look at policy, and if we have some, you know, things to say about equity and diversity and inclusion, and if your expertise or your knowledge and experiences about, you know, how people write things down to be done, if you have some like information or feedback or questions about how we can do that, I think that's going to help us get to, okay, now we can talk about how we're training our officers, and then we can talk about, all right, well, when from that training, what's happening in the streets. But there is still a fluid process to this. I think it just needs to be said. Go ahead, Andy.
I think kind of what Brian said, it comes down to selection, training, and supervision. And all these policies are guidelines, you know, for use as far as supervising and having the officer know what expectations are.
So I guess the only piece of that is what I didn't see within the policy. So as we're talking about policy, the only thing I didn't see within it, or I thought that might be nice, would be explicit language around the use of force, and around that bias. How bias implicates use of force. I know we didn't notice that, or I didn't notice that in the policy itself. So I was trying to guess. I know we have a thought process or directive
discussion.
Yeah, but I didn't see any of that.
What would that look like? And like, that's worth discussion for me. And again, I'm a citizen learning as well. So go ahead, Tanya. I see you unmuted.
Well, I'm just thinking, and again, Chief O'Malley or anybody else with law enforcement, you know, background, please to stop me if I'm wrong. But I would think that's difficult to put into a policy because it's going to be different for every person. We also can't know what folks' biases are. So that is more of a training conversation. Not to say that it can't be, I think, confirmed or just emphasized within, but I think policies are more, these are our guidelines. Training is where we can identify, like, do we have an issue with this person? Are their biases going to get in the way? And I think one thing that we have to think about with, unconscious biases, whether it's explicit or implicit, is that once they come into your consciousness, then you can choose whether you're going to confront them. So if you don't confront them, then we have problems with if somebody, somebody carrying a gun or somebody that can end up another person's life, if they have a bias against that person and haven't checked that bias, then we have a more difficult problem. But I think talking about it in terms of policies is challenging. I think we have to go before that and talk about it in training. And I could be wrong, so shoot me down if I am.
Anybody have any comments on that? Because that changes the timeline of the next half an hour to 20 minutes. Because if no one has anything else to say about our policy, because so far, like you said, the guidelines look great to me. There may be some things that I'm missing, but so far I won't be able to say we would have to go there to come back there. And this is a moment where we're doing committee recommendations. So I want to make sure I'm using our time wisely. If there are any more questions or comments, we can go through too, but just Chief O'Malley, just keeping that in mind, like we don't want to go through it with a fine tooth comb. So I know we want to have a good pace, but we're not going to be going through it with a fine tooth comb unless people have questions that they know they're bringing to the table right now. Does that sound okay with everybody?
I think that's great, Aisha. And I want to quickly add, because I think I'm glad we brought up biases though, because it gets us connecting policy to training. And it allows the chief and the rest of the committee to kind of understand that in the end, this will all tie together, we hope. So good points for everybody. I think that everybody brought that up.
Anybody have any questions, or can we ask Chief O'Malley to go ahead? All right, go ahead, Chief O'Malley.
Okay. Okay, then we were on the non-permissible use of firearms. We went through that. And again, I think there was a question 2 weeks ago on mere suspicion. That's one of the times it's not a permissible use. We don't allow warning shots, never have. Talked about the vehicle, not shooting at a vehicle, and then there's except if someone's shooting, at you from the vehicle. Any questions on this section? I can't see everybody, so.
No.
I can see Tanya and the mayor. That's about it on my screen. Then we talked about the drawing, displaying the pointing of a firearm. Then again, the giving the warning, police don't move. Okay, then we're going to talk about if a shooting does occur, that is investigated by the Attorney General's office. That's not investigated by the Lewiston Police Department. And that's been, and then it has whenever any type of use, deadly force is used, we have to contact the Attorney General's office. So the next couple slides just talk about the Attorney General's office and what they do when we have to contact them for the different types of force that's used. That's it, yeah. And then this next slide, we talk about if an officer is involved in a shooting, what we do, we place them on administrative leave. We do have them undergo counseling with a licensed psychologist before they can return to duty. The next slide talks about the training, which is set by the Maine Criminal Justice Academy.
What's the turnaround time for it? So on the last slide, it talked about the officers, they can't carry guns until they've been trained. Is there a time frame on that? So, you know, if it takes them a year, they can still go through training, or do you have like?
Well, no, if somebody
cutoff?
couldn't qualify within a year, they wouldn't be able to work here. We've never had that happen. But yeah, if it would be a year, they wouldn't be working for the city anymore. So what it is when they go to the police academy, they qualify up there, and then they come down here, and we qualify them twice a year here with our firearms. If we do have an officer that has an issue with their firearms, we do remedial training. I have in-house firearms instructors that we can meet individually with the officers one-on-one if we need to.
Also a question, Chief O'Malley, when say there has been use of deadly force,
yep.
Or an officer involved shooting, it doesn't have to be deadly force, like the person died, right?
Right. No,
they
I know we had one where an officer, I don't know if you folks remember, those of you who've been around for a while, there was a couple of kids, I think they were from Leeds. They stole a giant front end loader, and they were smashing into vehicles and cars, and they were driving down the turnpike the wrong way, and my officers were in pursuit, and one of my supervisors ended up shooting at the tire, and then the kids pulled right over, and so there was no even damage. These truck tires are so huge that we still call the Attorney General's office, and we went through this whole process of the psychologist, and the Attorney General's office came in and took over the investigation.
Okay, and with the when they need to be cleared by the psychologist before they go back to work of any capacity. Well, like as far as engaging with humans, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And then the same thing for the training with the less than lethal force. They have to meet the standards set by the Criminal Justice Academy. And then again, we don't allow them to carry any of these items if they haven't qualified with them. Also, we do not authorize the use of neck restraints. Don't give officers instructions on that. They don't teach that at the police academy either. This is also, the guidelines they set forward, the police academy. And we talked about the forms, the way that we document. We've been saying use of force, but the forms are called response to resistance report. We talked about the process that goes through, the review on 2 levels by the immediate supervisor and then by the deputy chief.
So I'm wondering in this case, I'm sorry I have so many questions. I apologize, but
Don't be sorry, Tanya.
in this first one, because to me, obviously if physical force is used, I would imagine folks want to know about it, right? So I just don't understand why this shall wouldn't be replaced with must. And it could, I could just have a bias against the word shall. Maybe that's what it is. But
I think you might, because every time they have to do it. So
they have to do it. Okay.
They have to do it. I mean, if an officer takes out their taser and holds it at their side and doesn't even point at everybody, we have them documented.
Okay. The reason, and again, I'm not pushing back, I'm just trying to get clarity, but I think it was on slide 6, or I can't remember the slide, but there's a slide that I think it was like they must report the incident, like the word must was used there. And to me, that just sticks out, like you have to do this. Yep. There's no like ambiguity. This isn't up to your discretion, you must. So I think this is where I had that question. Okay. Why would something, just because to me, it's like if you've done it.
It could just be an oversight, but they have to fill it out. So gotcha. This shall, in our practice, is a must. I mean,
it is.
Change that shall to must, and it's not going to change the practices here, but yes, I can do that.
Okay.
And I can do that without getting approval from the city council or anything like that. I mean, that's something I can change.
I appreciate that, yep. Chief.
Isn't shall and must the same though, Tanya? I mean,
that's what I said.
One
it
is
could
a suggestion, and one seems like it. You got to do it. One's required, and one is like you can do it, but there's some circumstances where there's.
And I hear where you're coming from, but what I'm telling you in terms of practice here, like all reports shall be reviewed and approved by the officer supervisor and forwarded to the deputy chief. That has to be done. That is done. That is not. Well, I don't feel like filling. I don't feel like sending it to the deputy chief. That doesn't happen. It's a must, right here.
Gotcha.
I'm going to
I
move.
think it's important for language to be that way. You know, a chief as a father, if I tell my kids that they must do something, they're going to do it. You know, if I give them an option, they may come and give me, you know, they may negotiate with me a little bit as well. So,
I'll also say with Chief O'Malley, you're chief right now, but you are not going to be chief forever because you don't live forever. But the policy, if it stays the way it is, will live forever. So the next guy or the next woman or the next who that comes in to be the chief of police, they may not have that, you know, that relationship or that attitude that you have that this must be done, and that's how things run in my office. So.
I appreciate that, but it is part of our CALIA that we have to do these response to resistance forms. That's part of our when we get
cool.
verification. So that's part of it, that you have to submit these. We have to have the reviews. We must do an annual review. I mean, all that stuff is required. So this was before I was the chief, and this will be after I'm chief. But this is part of our CALIA certification that we must do all this stuff.
Okay.
But I understand where you're coming from.
I appreciate that.
And then this was the form that's kind of washed out. It's hard to see. And this was that example I gave about the car and how many how we document everything that the officers do when they're at the scene. They have to submit their reports.
So Chief, you said something just a moment ago that whenever the reports are, use of force reports are reviewed internally by the department. Is that an annual thing?
The response to resistance or use of force is reviewed every time one is submitted, every time force is used by the immediate supervisor and the deputy chief. And then we do a year-end review of all of it.
And then when CALIA does their certification, they review all of them?
We have to submit proofs to them that we're doing that. We have to submit that year-end report. And I gave you folks the report a couple of weeks ago of what we do for a year report. And that's a requirement for CALIA.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about that too. So when you have someone, if say for instance, there's an officer who has a higher percentage of reports than another, how do y'all handle that? Or do you flag that? Or what's the policy around that person?
We do. There's a report that goes out to the public that you folks saw. Then there's also an internal one that goes by the officers. And we go by each shift, we go by each incident, and then we also flag the officer to their supervisor to say, hey, is there anything else going on with this officer? We're seeing he's had, this number, X number of response to resistant use of force. What else is going on? Is there anything in his personal life? Is he still married? Is there issue? I mean, we give them the heads up and we go through all that. And that goes into, I don't know if I've given you this yet, a copy of our policy for the personal early warning system. It's called PEWS. And that's part of that we review. And that is given to the shift supervisors, because sometimes one sergeant may not be working when a use of force, or there's somebody on a vacation day or something like that. So that's why I make sure the immediate supervisor are aware of what's going on. But once again, we review each individual, I'm going to say use of force, so we're all on the same page, each use of force or response to resistance to make sure that it follows policy.
Thank you.
That most recent policy that you just said about that you look into it in that way, is that a CALIA recommended policy? That
the personal early warning system?
Yeah.
That is CALIA, but we've had that for, I don't know, since late 90s.
So was it generated within the department, or was it generated through an inspection process of CALIA? And they
it's one of CALIA's recommendations 20 some odd years ago that we began doing this.
Okay, good, thank you.
And if nobody has any questions, next slide. All right, this talks about handcuffing. Pretty straightforward.
Chief, would you mind going back to that real quick? And I'm probably going to be a thorn in everyone's side here, but and I think this just really speaks to more consistency. But if you look, number one, all suspects arrested for class A, B, and C crimes shall be handcuffed. Number two, may be handcuffed, and then you go to may be handcuffed, not you.
Right, because
Is there a difference there because of the type of crime?
yes.
Okay. All right, and then in the next slide.
Yep.
Okay, no, I was just comparing the use of the word, but yeah, I got you.
And
Okay.
so, just to add to that, if I can, Tanya, so the A, B, and C, those are felony crimes.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Then this is the OC. Folks may know it as mace. I told you we do not use tear gas. And this talks about when OC can be used. And then when it should not be used on individuals. If you remember, I talked about the MK46. That's a larger canister of OC. It kind of looks like a fire extinguisher. It says, you know, you don't use it on peaceful protests. Also, the warnings are given. And if you look here, I'm not picking on you either, Tanya, but whenever practical, that's
Yep.
kind of the same thing as
Sure.
what the other, you know, a verbal warning should be issued.
Yep. Oh, can you go back to that though?
Yep.
Does it say? Okay, so a verbal warning must be issued prior to deploying it.
Well, a verbal
Right.
warning should be issued. Whenever practical, a verbal warning should be issued.
Right, no, I'm just talking about the next sentence down. It says a verbal warning must be issued prior to deploying.
Right, that's when you have, if we had a large crowd.
The other one, gotcha.
Right, of the big canister that look, right, exactly.
Okay.
That's when you must.
Gotcha, okay,
And only certain people are qualified, certified to use that.
okay.
And then again, we talk about OC or MACE, about filling out an incident report and getting them treatment, medical treatment, eye wash stations. And then again with tasers, again, only officers who are authorized to use it can do it. And I told the group 2 weeks ago that I make all my officers be tased, so they have a greater appreciation for the use of the taser. That's not a requirement from the police academy, but we do that here. And we talk about response to resistance, use of force with the taser. Have to fill out the, says shall, but
I know.
it's always, it's done that way.
Yeah. Mhm.
Shows, you know, we talk about where you know, the ideal location is to use the center of mass of the subject's back. And then again, whenever reasonably possible. You know, that sometimes doesn't work out that way, but we try to do that. And again, prohibited uses of the taser. You know, you don't want to, somebody's running on a roof, you don't want to tase them because they're going to fall off, you know, or, you know, running over a bridge over water, things like that. And we go through all this training. We do this training yearly with our officers. They don't have to get tased yearly, but they have to go through the training yearly. And then this I put in here, this is the main state law regarding the use of physical force by law enforcement officers. This is state law here. Operating machinery or vehicle, again, the taser still. Taser has a lot to it.
I have a question.
Yep.
Two questions, actually. I would love, I think it was a few back, it's on with the tasing. So if someone is verbally aggressive, one more back, I think, Chief.
Yep.
So, right. So the subject is engaging in like active aggressive, oh, no.
Right, well, it says the taser should be utilized on a subject who is explicitly communicating intent or engaging in active aggressive resistance against an officer. Not to, because oftentimes, Constable July, you'll have say, oh, okay, you're under arrest, turn around and put your hands behind your back. No, you're not going to arrest me. And the person just standing there, hands by their side, not being aggressive. Then you have someone that says, puts their hands up and, gets in a fighting stance or says, I'm going to, kick your behind, or they become aggressive towards you, that would be different than, we don't all of a sudden, if they say, okay, you're under arrest, turn around, put your hands behind your back. No, I don't want to get arrested. We don't all of a sudden just tase them. So that's what it's going to be aggressive.
Pretty elevated level of
physically towards the officer. It's a step above using OC or even putting your hand on their arm, because it's a taser. It's not, even though it's still a less than lethal force, it's still a higher level of use of force.
Thank you. And then my second question was more around the terminology excited delirium, which is like 4 slides out, further out, down.
Yeah.
Keep going. There we go.
Yeah, we have that aftercare, and then I think, down here, and then we talk about it here. Yep.
So just wondering, is that a state term like that? I mean, just as a clinician, I guess myself, I see a word like that, and I see this document, and I guess just wondered if you could talk about that in the police world.
Well, oftentimes you'll have somebody who's under the influence of drugs. There have been instances of, attacking police officers with almost superhuman strength. But we know that this, does occur, but also, there's medical side effects to it, because if they're already, their body temperature is raised, they're in an excited state, they start wrestling with officers. So that's why, we want to call it an ambulance, UAS, United Ambulance, to have them medical attention, because of, more often than not, I've seen it as caused by drugs, but it could be psychiatric as well.
Well, and I get that. I guess what I was wondering, Chief, was just the choice of words. Like, to me, as I read this, it strikes me as psychosis or something, right? And so as I was reading excited delirium, I just didn't know, like, who chose that? Like, where did that word come from? Is that a state term?
I don't think it's a state term. I mean, I've seen it in training with taser, and just with, putting people in custody or protective custody, and just making sure, because of this state that they're in, that they get medical attention.
I would piggyback on Councilor Jelines's thoughts there for the same exact reasons. I know that stuck out to me, like, how does an officer, delirium to me, again, that's clinical, right? So I'm thinking psychosis as well. So how does one determine if that's what it is? I know in CIT, and I worked for NAMI for 2 years, so I've been involved in CIT. And when we've talked about different mental health challenges or mental illness, some of the feedback that we got from officers was, that's really not our job. Like, our job is, and it's not, I agree. But when we use terms like this, it is a little ambiguous, I think.
Well, if you're looking at the definition we have in our policy, it does say caused by drugs or a psychiatric illness.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever the cause is, that person, and if I'll go back one more slide, an ambulance on scene, emergency response and care shall be ordered for situation. So even if the officers don't know if this is a psychiatric, a psychosis, or it's a drug, they're going to get this person medical attention and more, probably St. Mary's Hospital or CMMC, but probably St. Mary's, and get them up there, and then they'll figure out what the issue is. That, obviously I can't have my officers, do a medical history on somebody standing on the side of the street when they're, I think, Tanya, I think you said you saw the video of the woman smashing her face over and over on that street. That woman wasn't arrested.
Right.
But that's when we're saying, if you're seeing signs of this, this is call an ambulance, get the medical attention.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
I don't expect them to put in their report it was caused by meth, or it was caused by, some untreated mental health issue.
Gotcha.
And the definition definitely has, multiple descriptions on what they might see as an officer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you look at other signs down there in the second paragraph on this slide.
Thank you.
Yep. Then we have one on the use of the impact projectile. I told you we have bean bags that we use. We've never used them. We got them a few years ago. My concern was and actually we just had somebody over 2 weeks ago, came charging at one of my offices. She'd been off the field training program for about 3 days, 2 knives in his hands, had been threatening to kill family members and himself. She was the first one that showed up. He came running down the driveway, 2 knives in his hand, charging at her, yelling, shoot me, kill me. Obviously, we don't want to shoot someone like this. She didn't shoot him. She actually retreated, went around the back of her cruiser and drew her taser. So he ended up running to the back of his house, and 3 more officers showed up, and then the supervisor was coming because in his cruiser, he has the shotgun that shoots the beanbags that painted fluorescent orange, so there's no confusion. The container it's in and the shotgun itself is fluorescent orange. So we got those, so we would, when it's those instances of, suicide by cop is kind of the common term, that we would have another tool to use, as opposed to when I came on the police department, you were either shooting them or you were getting stabbed. And that's why we have these. We've never had to use them. They may have used that, but by the time the supervisor got up, one of the officers was able to talk him down and get him to drop the knives. So they get trained in using that. So nobody can use that unless they're trained in it. But they do all receive that training, and it's, it's something for us to use as opposed to just relying on our firearms. Because oftentimes, and I think I did say this 2 weeks ago, with the taser would be kind of the same thing, but as we all know, the weather will be changing in a couple of months, and then people wear heavy clothing, heavy jackets and things like that, then the tasers oftentimes don't work. So that's why we got these impact projectiles. Anybody have any questions on that? All right, and then we've got, and this talks about people that pose a threat of death to themselves. And it talks about, we have to be trained in using that. And then we have the expandable batons that the officers carry with them. Have to be trained in it. Talks about when you can use the baton. And then it talks about the different areas of striking areas. Level 1 areas, level 2, and the higher up they go. And I did say we have level 3, but that would be the same thing as using deadly force if you had to do that. It's the head, the neck, kind of the middle of the body. It can cause serious bodily injury or harm, and you have to be justified in using, shooting them with your gun, the same thing as you're going to hit somebody in the head with your baton. And that's talked about here in the policy as well, and in the training that the officers receive. Okay, and then we have a pepper ball system. And this is, again, little small round balls that have the same thing, the OC or the mace. It's called a pepper ball system. It would be kind of, we could use if we wasn't successful with the bean bags, the same type of thing. We could use it on someone. And what it is you shoot it at the ground and then it explodes. So it puts a puff of smoke in the person. And I say smoke, but it's actually OC in someone's face. And I don't know if you know how OC works, but it swells up your your mucous membrane in your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. So it makes it difficult to breathe in, to see, and it's not a permanent thing. And again, it's not tear gas. So you have to be specially trained in the use of that. I think, yep. And then officers are prohibited from carrying any other authorized weapons at any other time. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. Is there any questions on
that? On the OC, so back when I was in law enforcement, you had to be tased and you had to enjoy the effects of OC spray. Is that still a practice that officers have to endure both of those?
I tase them here at the station, at the police department before they go to the criminal justice academy. I believe they get sprayed up at the academy, but I can double check on that for you. Okay. I don't make the officers get sprayed with OC here at the station.
No, as long as they feel it once in their training. And truly, I mean, I can smile about it now. That was probably one of the worst experiences I went through. It was worse than the taser, because the taser is instant, but it's over quickly. With the OC, I mean, it takes 20, 30 minutes of that. But truly, I believe that's, an important part of the training, because it's easy to turn to those if you don't know what you're actually doing with it. Yeah.
They do get sprayed at the academy.
Okay.
Cool.
So
It's not cool if you get have it done to you.
No, and
No,
we were thinking about making that a part of the ad hoc committee, but we decided, yeah.
Listen, I always hesitate, so
Yeah,
I'm
good time.
hoping that will cause you to hesitate to use it if you don't need it.
Well, that's why I do the taser, to make sure that, I mean, seriously, they have a great appreciation of that. Once they've been tased, to say, okay, is this person really being aggressive towards me? Or there's other way I can do that, because they felt how that is. And they have to know that, they got to follow our rules and regulations in regards to the use of that. So yeah, that's why I do it. And, of course they're new and they're young and they're all gung ho and ready to go to the police academy. And then we tase them, and get a better appreciation for it. I'll tell you that much. I've seen it.
Do you have, Chief, do you have, and you may have already provided this, so if you have, just let me know. Do you have data that shows how many times that person experiencing what was later found to be a mental health condition was tased? Do you have that data?
Yeah, I think because I know we gave you a bunch of data.
Yeah. It might be in there again.
Dale has LPD data. Okay, because I had the copies of the breakdown of. Are you guys still see my screen?
Yes.
Right. So yeah, so that's because we were looking at the calls for service in terms of, because I know that was one of the questions you asked. But like if you look here, we don't have it broken down if there's mental health issues.
Okay.
And again, that might come to because we do ask on that response to resistance form, the under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and I think that comes down to a lot of times when you have drug use, you have the underlying mental health issues. So
sure.
So I'd have to look at that. But I know I don't have a report, and that would be something different. And some of the stuff you asked for, I think I said I may not be able to provide, but I've
of course
provided a whole bunch of stuff. I know it's a lot to read through, and I think some of you asked for certain things. So maybe those of you who wanted to know about, well, here I have mental, and intox calls for service. I don't know if you had a chance to see this one yet.
Yeah.
I did give it to Dale. I don't know if that all got sent to you folks yet. But this talks about, I know we're kind of off topic here. The calls for service, like in 2019, were 47,162. And out of that, what PCF stands for person cared for, calls for service, we went to 2,080. And then if you read that, Tanya, this was prepared by my crime analysis, and what she ended up having to do was search for different words to try to find them, because sometimes somebody will call up and say, there's somebody intoxicated in the middle of the road or on the sidewalk, or there's somebody, we get a lot of, unfortunately, someone's overdosed or things like that. So, and then there'll be somebody suicidal. So a lot of it depends on how the dispatchers put it in. So that's why she did it by searching for words. So if you read through this, Tony, I think that might, and I think Dale gave it to you, but it was the medical, mental, and detox. And
Okay. I did. It's there under data. Chief.
Okay. Thank you.
If you read that, then maybe we can come back and address that again.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
So when I looked over the, I'm sorry, did somebody raise their hand and I interrupted?
No.
Okay.
No, it's you.
Okay, thank you. When I read, first of all, being former law enforcement, when I read through these, all the way through, I tried to think, is this best practice? And are we at the highest standard that is seen around the country? And the chief is absolutely correct. Maine truly has been a leader. What I didn't read, and I had a conversation with Aisha today, and I can't remember your wording, Aisha, but you said, as you read through these, look for, what do you remember what that was?
I wish I could say that I remembered, but just references. So I was looking for like masculine references, looking for pronouns used where it's not needed. Like what kind of language comes after what we're talking about when we say discipline. I'm just looking for objective and subjective wording in our policy. And I said that because that's when we talk about policy, we're looking for where we can, the foundation and the baseline, and we can talk about training and all that other stuff. But of course, we have to make sure that the foundation is clear and the foundation is good. And I think what I said, what we're talking about here is we're talking about bringing it into our community and showing that that is the case. And so, yeah, we're looking at our policy and we are leading. We just want to make sure that's the case. Now it's time to move on to the next step. That's in my opinion. That's what we talked about.
Yeah. So, when I read them, I left feeling that Lewiston is, at least when it comes to the best practices or what people perceive as the best practices. I felt really confident that we are at that level. I feel even more confident that not only does the department review these policies annually, but it's also reviewed by CALEA. And I realize that's law enforcement, reviewing law enforcement. And I know some folks may struggle with that. But I got to tell you, some of the CALEA inspectors that I know, they take their job really serious. And there are many departments that try to be CALEA certified and they just are not. I mean, so there is a high standard there.
Go ahead, Andy.
I can talk to the CALEA portion of it. There's 18,000 police departments, 180,000 police departments in the United States. 4% are CALEA certified. There's about 700 police departments that only meet that high expectation. And Lewiston's been one since 1991.
As compared to other departments in our state, do you know the numbers roughly? Like, do you know the percentage of departments that are CALEA? Is CALEA?
I think there are 5 in total.
5 total.
And part of like what Andy's talking about, it's expensive and it's a lot of work and it's an ongoing process. It's not like we did that. Like if you were to go back to 1995, our policies are not what they were back in 1995. They're always changing. And a lot of places just don't keep up with that. There are some police agencies that, have minimal policies, if any, but now the Maine Criminal Justice Academy is making them say you have to have certain policies to, I mean, I've got policies for everything. But there are ones, the big ticket items, they make sure that all these agencies have a policy. And that's where the main chiefs come in that the mayor spoke about. So listen, we'll write it all for you. We'll give it to you. Just put your name on it, make sure you follow it. And that's all you have to do. So that's what a lot of places do because they just don't have the manpower or the training and people to do what we do here at Lewiston.
I was going to say I appreciate the work you put in with the policy. And like, I did try to read through as much and gain as much knowledge as I could about policy with, the little bit of experience my eyes and mine have. But thank you. But I really appreciate the work you put in. And I want to just emphasize this is a process. And so I'm happy to find out that what we have on paper looks good. I'm happy to find out that we're one of the few in this state. So I just wanted to make that comment. And if anybody has any other comments about this portion, because Dennis, Mayor, we're supposed to make some recommendation if there is any. I honestly want to say that I don't want to be forced to make any recommendations right now, or what does that process look like for us?
So my thoughts are, if we've looked at the policy and we believe at this point they meet standards that are acceptable throughout Maine, then I think as we move to training in training, so I guess training first and hiring practices possibly, but when we move to training, does that meet does the training serve the policies? And then I think down the road, when the standing committee potentially looks at data, there may be suggestions for change or additional policies at that time. So I think just having the foundation of the policy is really important, because when we look at training, and everything else, you know, we'll go back to the policies and ask the chief about it. And, you know, if the data is showing one thing, could he come up with a policy that would address that? Everything, you know, we can make recommendations as the committee, but working as closely as possible with the chief is going to be really vital, because one, you know, obviously we want his buy-in, and he may have information or policies that he's aware of, or, you know, same with Andy, he can bring a lot to that side of the discussion as well. I hope I made sense there. I kind of bounced around.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming that the chief and everyone that's here will have, like, as we go along, and they'll have that same equal voice as to what should and shouldn't be recommended too, because of the knowledge that you have. And again, I'll say my question that I'm leaving here with is, this is the policy that we should be standing on, and this policy feels right and good to us as a committee. That's the question I'm leaving with. Does everybody feel comfortable with that? And do we have any recommendations for our policy other than the shall and the must? I don't want to forget that, because as we laugh, that's, you know.
Yeah, and again, yeah.
We should change that, and that's, I want to make sure we're not skirting over that either.
Yeah, I think for me, they all, you know, they're written as, if they are followed, it seems like we would have a very competent, safe, and community-based police force, right? The issue that I have, and it has clearly nothing to do with Chief O'Malley, you know, it's like, he didn't write it. So like when we say shall, may, must, like if something is supposed to be done, let's use the same language across the board, but that is something that can be changed. Like Chief O'Malley said, if he wanted to, he could just go in there and change that wording. So for me, it was more just how it read. You know, if my loved one gets, you know, had an unfortunate interaction with law enforcement and was killed, and I wanted to see a policy, if I saw shall, and then instead of thinking it should have said must, I would have questions. So I think that's where I'm trying to come at this from. But I definitely don't personally have any other comments or thoughts about changing or recommendations to make.
And Aisha, you had asked, you know, for my and Dennis's thoughts. Can we just check in with Dennis just to make sure he had nothing to add to that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Mayor. Aisha, no, I think you're absolutely on the right track in terms of the process. I think this has been a good process, good discussion. And if the committee does feel there's no recommendations at this point, the only thing I think I would add is that it doesn't mean that as we go through further part of the process, you may come back and there may be a recommendation. That's there. I think that option will always be there as we go through this process. And I think that's part of the process. So a little bit of flexibility, but an openness to kind of going through it and not being scared to, I guess, go back to this if we need to take a look at it. So, but yeah, I think everything is right on track.
Yeah, as you were talking, Dennis, I just Googled shall, and in the Webster Dictionary, it says, when used in laws, regulation, or directives to express what is mandatory. So I'm going to say that's probably why we have shall, because it isn't directive, that it's mandatory.
Makes sense. Yeah, and I think Andrew spoke to that too, that it's common language in law enforcement. So I do appreciate that. And I appreciate you just going back and forth answering those, you know, and just being able to kind of take us through this whole thing again, because it's important. So appreciate that.
It's a lot of information. And I think you might have a little homework. I mean, to read through everything. And I know there's a lot of data there as well. And I think that's going to be maybe just one meeting in itself, just kind of looking at all that between all of you folks, and you have a discussion of what everybody would. And like I said, some of it I may not be able to get down as deep as you want to, but we're making our best attempt to do that.
Have you, through this discussion, have you thought of other areas that you're going to start collecting data that you might not have now? Are there other areas that you've considered?
I'm still trying to fill the 4 pages of data that they asked for, Mayor.
Okay, you're still, okay.
And there's a lot there that Dale has given to him. So I think if folks, I'm assuming certain people ask for certain things. So if they read through that, and if they have questions, say, well, you showed us this, is there any way you can get that? And I'll see, but like, again, it all depends on our record keeping system. And, hand searching stuff takes a very, very long time. And that's kind of where we are for some of these requests.
Can I ask, I'd like to ask Chief O'Malley, because there's, of course, the first time doing this and the first time of gathering and collecting this and being aware of this information is going to be really difficult for someone or to add into your system. But is this something that you think would be like these questions? Would it be hard to keep this going? Would it be hard to continue to collect that type of information?
Well, some of the data we do collect, but I think some of the most difficult ones trying to collect is one of the questions were about folks with mental health issues and, because we have so many different scenarios that come in. So we have to actually look at the notes that the officers put in their report of saying, so-and-so was transported to St. Mary's Hospital for detox, or for, we Narcaned him and took him to the CMMC, because it'll come in as a person cared for medical, or it'll come in as overdose will come in as a poisoning. A lot of it's just based on the call notes that the dispatcher initially puts in. So that's how my crime analysis has to search for it. We could have somebody, saying, oh, we got somebody breaking a window, but then it ends up being, it's a person cared for, that the person's having some sort of psychotic breakdown, and we take them to St. Mary's Hospital. So it's difficult to get into those details that deep down, because they can, if you're driving by and you see somebody laying on the side of the road, you say, oh, there's somebody laying on the side of the road, person cared for. Is it a medical? Is it physical? What is that? That's where it's hard to get a lot of that information. But I think if you read what we've given you and then kind of go from there, that may help me try to get some more. But in terms of the numbers for use of force and things like that, we keep track of that already.
I think there's no. Oh, go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Chief, I'm very impressed with your presentation and all the policies that our officers follow and the department has. So thank you for that. And I want to apologize for not being on the previous meeting. My cat was sick. So I have a question regarding reports. Do the officers handwrite the reports, or do they use a tablet or a computer or some kind of a system?
The officers can come into the station and they write on desktop computers. They also have what's called MDTs in their cruisers, which is a mobile data terminal, where they can type in just a few short lines. It all depends on the extent of how long their report is. So sometimes they can do them in the cruiser, but anything somewhat in depth, they'll come into the police station. They have to type on a desktop computer.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's like categories or things that they can click on. Like, for example, if a situation mostly involved mental health, if a situation mostly involved like drug something, I don't know, so that when we go back later, we can somehow like gather all that data and like click mental health, for example, and then it will bring all that together. I'm just thinking out loud, but I don't know.
Well, that's what'll happen is that someone calls in, and so the dispatch will initially classify it as, say, it's a person cared for medical, or it's an overdose. What happens is then the officer shows up. It may not be that. It may, we've had people call and say, oh, I think someone's dead. And so we have, an unattended death, and they show up and the person's, having a medical problem. So they will try to reclassify that. I'd like to say that always happens every time, but oftentimes when an officer shows up, they're giving somebody Narcan, they're giving him CPR, the person wakes up and they start fighting with him. Our policy says they will get medical attention after we've given them Narcan. So sometimes they don't want to go to in UAS and go to the hospital, so we have to talk them into that. So Sometimes that doesn't happen. The ideal situation would be that they would reclassify, but I know for a fact that doesn't always happen. That's when it often comes down to having to search the actual narratives for it. We do what we can, you know, to try to do that, Councilor.
Yeah,
Cleve.
thank you.
Can I ask a question to piggyback off of that? Is it work? Do you feel like there's a common language around like mental health that when they do their reports, there isn't so many different types of things for your investigators to pull out? Is there a common language to use? Or
Well, there is, and what I guess it's hard to get this across from our record keeping system. So the way we search it is we have to go by the classification that is created in our dispatch center. So if you have a burglary, a theft, a robbery, you know, you have many different types of sexual assaults that would come in. So that's how we have to search that through this main title. And then sometimes the officers will just type what we call a one line or 2 or 3 lines in what's the dispatch notes. And that's just under what's called a call number. When it's more in depth, the officer, you start with a call number, then they build what's an offense number. And that's when they go into greater detail. And unfortunately, it's just the system that we have. So it's not as if I have to change the verbiage. It's just a matter of what's initially entered in is what we have to search for to start going through it. Then you have to search. So if you search for person cared for mental, person cared for medical, suicidal, overdose, then once you have that section pulled out of those 47,000 calls, we had, 2,080 last year. Then you have to go through the 2,080 and kind of read through to see what each one was. And that takes a lot of time.
A lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, if we were a smaller community where you don't have over 47,000 calls, it might be easy to do, but unfortunately, and we are a service center, so we get a lot of folks that come here, you know, use Tri-County, use St. Mary's. So we get a lot of those calls, and it's folks that come here that my officers have to deal with, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's, you know, it's no specific time.
So we're at the time where we can.
I have another question.
Well, I want to say that we want to leave a little bit of time for public comment, and I think we do have some people. So,
Okay.
and we're at 7 o'clock almost. So.
Alicia, I will place the list of Maine accredited police departments in that data folder so that people can see which departments in Maine have achieved that, and there are 5.
Thank you. Thank you. Sophia, go ahead, please.
Oh, I thought I couldn't ask. Okay, so this is concerning like reports, but let's say, I don't want to bring another subject into this regarding schools, SROs in schools. If let's say one of the schools resource officers takes a kid or like outside police or whatever, like come assist an SRO in the school, or they have to remove a kid from the school, or whatever the situation, do officers write a report on that?
Yes.
Okay.
So and I can tell you that my school resource officer has not arrested anybody in the elementary school, and I think it's 6 years. So we keep track of that. Now, if anytime a juvenile is arrested, we should be able to get that as well. I think somebody asked for that. That's documented. There's reports where even if the juvenile is summoned, the parents have to be involved, and we keep track of those reports. Yes.
On that same note, and Aisha, this will be 20 seconds, I promise. On that same note, Chief, in thinking about the handcuffing of a suspect or whatever, do those same rules apply if the person is a juvenile?
Again, it would depend on the crime.
Yep.
And, you know, elementary school, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
We haven't. My school resource officers in the elementary school have a good working relationship with the schools and with the kids. Now, does it happen at the middle school and the high school? It has happened in the middle school and the high school. unfortunately, but there are circumstances where I think it was the middle school a couple of years ago. We had a young man who was beaten up and robbed in the bathroom up at the middle school. So that does happen. Unfortunately, I see more of the instances are when juveniles are out of school, where we have more of the issues. You know, we've had some kids steal a car, things like that, more high-end crimes that they'll be handcuffed, brought to the station, and regardless of what the crime is, the parents are contacted and allowed to come in here. And then it's up to probation. I know we're getting off topic here. We're going to run out of time, but probation officers decide what's going to happen with the kids. I believe the Department of Corrections will not, and they've changed over the years, will not send somebody down to what we call the youth center, unless it's a Class A felony with violence involved. Oftentimes, if the parents say, I can't control this child, we work with New Beginnings. We try to find placement for them so the kids just aren't kicked back out on the street or just run away from the parents again.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
That's a good question, Tony. Thank you. Does anybody else have any final comments before we open it up to the public? Give them a few minutes. And do we have any, Dennis? Oh, Dale running the show. Go right ahead, Dale. And you're muted. I wish I could unmute you. No.
I just brought in Maggie.
Hi, my name's Maggie Diamond-Stanek. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. I have a lot of comments, actually. So along those lines, actually, my first question, so maybe I'll just ask all the questions at once. My first one is there a space for us as members of the public to comment or ask questions of the committee members outside of the last 10 minutes of these meetings? Is that something you'd be amenable to? Maybe not. You don't want our input. That would be understandable, I guess. Is the data that Chief O'Malley has shared available for the public to look through as well? I'd be very interested in that information. Along those lines, I think it strikes me that a lot of these policies are actually highly subjective, even as they are very laid out. They rely on officers' discretion a lot. So I am very curious to see the data on the implementation, which I understand will be coming at a later date. Very specific points that I have in terms of policies. A question is, who determines the race of the people and the ethnicity of the people involved in the calls? Is that the officer's perspective? Is it self-reported by the participants? I think you might end up potentially with different answers there. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to see. In terms of policy changes, I know it sounded like, I'm sorry, I missed a little bit. My kid talking. It's like of the incident reports is done within law enforcement. And I wonder if having a public committee that reviews all of the incident reports, not just a summary at the end of the year or something, might actually help the community, both the police force better and give them more insight into policies that they might want to see changed or see different or see differently implemented, so that the community can have the police force that it wants. And then I swear this might be my final comment. It just strikes me that a lot of these policies are really focused on control of a situation. They're also focused on control of people based on an officer's discretion. And you know, that requires policies permitting really preemptive expression of power and authority. So it's not merely reactive, but it's the policies permit a preemptive kind of entering a situation from a position of authority. And I think, you know, some of the situations you've described, it makes that sound really, really reasonable and understandable, that the police officer need to control the situation. But I also wonder if that causes some of the problems and the tension between communities and police officers, because I think people tend to resent someone coming in with power over them. And especially when that's done in a situation that's not needed. I was struck last week when you gave the example, Chief O'Malley, of, you know, it's permissible if you're executing a search warrant to go in and handcuff every person in a space to prevent, ahead of time, prevent the destruction of evidence. And I just thought, oh my goodness, if you came into my house with a search warrant, legal search warrant, and handcuffed me and my children, I think it would be traumatizing to some extent. And that wouldn't be in reaction to me necessarily having done anything wrong. And so I wonder if there's a way to change the policies in some way to reduce that allowing of, or if it would be advisable, maybe it's not advisable, but to reduce that, or to set up a policy whereby it encourages a more tiered expression of power and authority as police officers enter a space. Sorry to go on so long. Thank you for your time, and I'll be quiet and listen now.
Thank you, Maggie. Do we have someone else still?
I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. Boy, that was a lot of questions from Maggie, so it's challenging to try to answer those. Did you write them down by chance?
I wrote the first question that she had down. I don't know if Dale, you did, but
yeah.
And we're also recording, so we have her recorded.
And Dane, I want you had your hand up.
I think Maggie struck the right point and the right chord, which is we really can't. It's hard to have a full conversation on policy without talking about all the things that matter here. Things like the biases that matter. Things like the fact that you really do have, full autonomy as an officer to make a decision, make a call. How do we know that you're making the best call objectively? Maggie hits it, on point. I don't know how we can have this conversation without having that piece of it as well.
Go ahead. Mayor, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I'm not sure it'll be the right answer, but we just have to remember being a police officer is inherently dangerous. You go into incidents that are dangerous, and officers do have to have some discretion in how they handle calls, and officers are human, so occasionally they're going to make mistakes. Policies are in place to help guide that decision process. I would, and I'm not sure that she was asking that we strip down all power of law enforcement.
No, and can I say we only did use of force. We only reviewed that portion, and I feel like Maggie is kind of alluding to the fact that we aren't talking about those policies that maybe reduce the use of force or anything in our policy or practice that we have on paper or written down that balances that out. Because yes, it's dangerous, but now it's also dangerous for those who are in certain situations where they feel like their life is in danger. So the balance in the community is what I think she's alluding to. And anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but that also means that we're supposed to be focusing on now going to the training. So yes, this is a dangerous situation. This is a dangerous job. So how do we balance that out? And when I hear Maggie say that, I'm like, all right, shoot, yes, that's why we're going to the next phase of it, to say, yes, our policies are sound. So what are we doing to make sure that the policy and the practice are matching? And are we missing things? Are there blind spots that we can talk about here? And I appreciate Maggie's comment about creating, I think you got cut off, about getting questions and comments to us, because I feel like we don't have all of the time, and a collective effort and a collective intelligence around this work is necessary. So I don't know how we can,
Well, we could allow
organize that or arrange that.
Yeah, we could allow public comment on individual agenda items. So
alert from calendar.
So we can talk more about that, Aisha, but I think that's doable, finding a way to let the public talk more easily during the main discussion.
Something that Maggie brought up that I thought, when she talked about the policies being, in her opinion, subjective, right? I I think that's why I harped so much on language, because when there is any ambiguity or ambiguous language and I understand from law enforcement uses this certain language and that's understood by everyone, but because we are also folks from the general public, and if I were looking at that as a community member, I would say, okay, so does shall, like, do they have to, do they not? And so that, I think that speaks to some of that. And, you know, if permissible, if the situation allows, like, those ifs are could get really big. You know, and we've seen that in other parts of the country where that's where, well, I thought my life was in danger. But what we're seeing, you know, as people viewing some of these instances is just like, well, how come the rest of us don't see it like that? You know, and to your point, Mayor, I absolutely agree. You know, law enforcement is a very dangerous line of work. Unfortunately, right now, you know, being raised and read as a person of color is also very dangerous in America. So we, and I think that we all can recognize lots of examples of why this is, but trying to get the community to trust the police is the ultimate goal, right? I think, you know, and I think that we're all doing that in bits and pieces, but, you know, I think to Maggie's point, when these policies do have some subjectivity in it, it creates discomfort for some. And, you know, so I appreciate her points as well.
Thank you. And y'all, you see, we've come at 7:02. We've come to that time where I don't think we have any recommendations right now. And okay. So we'll talk about our next meeting for September 2nd. And it's 7:02, and we have in our duties in order, the next thing we're doing, it says that we're talking about that process. But we've talked a lot about the type and nature of training. And I just want to bring that up, that's not the next thing we're talking about, even though we've talked about that a lot here. The next thing we're talking about says that city staff will present the process by which citizens' complaints against police officers and other city employees are investigated, and, if necessary, recommended improvements to this process to ensure that such complaints are addressed thoroughly, objectively, fairly, and in a timely manner. Very important. But I just want to make sure we're doing things in the way that it flows, especially the way that the conversation is going. Like, we are talking about training. To me, it seems like that would be something that we want to discuss before we start talking about, okay, well, now we've got our officers trained. This is what we're hearing. But that's just based on what we've been talking about. If we don't need to change anything, and if no one agrees, I'm okay with that too. We can keep it in that order. I just know that training keeps coming up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andy. And we may not be ready. You're muted. You're muted.
Do we need to make a recommendation to accept this before we move on to the other
policy? Is that something that we need to do, Mark?
Yeah, I don't think we need to do it tonight. And so yeah, I think that probably would be a good idea to come up with some type of wording. But there has to be caveats that so this is where I struggle. There may be recommendations on policies. We just don't have one yet. Right. No, I think we need to hold off on that now that I'm kind of thinking while I'm talking, which is sometimes difficult for me. But I also think I agree with you on the training issue. So I'm not sure what the committee feels, but we use the term training all the way through our discussion through this meeting, and that might be the flow of this, but I think it's a committee decision.
I personally don't have recommendations at this moment. I think I want time, but I think that was the initial hope for the committee. But also I wanna, you know, Maggie asked really great questions and made really great comments, and we really need to pay attention to that and somehow respond to her via email. Or I do hear you, Maggie, and I didn't hear all your questions, but also Aisha, and Mayor, can someone from the public send in comments like regular city council agenda?
Yeah, so I was thinking as Maggie was talking that we may want to ask her to send an email with some of her thoughts, because there were so many. I struggled to, it might have been better that someone asked a question, we quickly answer it, ask a question. But we are limiting public comment to 3 minutes per person in general. So yeah, Dennis, can we get an ad hoc committee email address set up?
Yes, actually, what I would recommend, and we do have a public comment email that we have established for the city council. It's public comment at lewistonmaine.gov. We can certainly, what we could do is we can actually post that on our ad hoc committee web page. And I think that, members of the public that address the, it'll be obvious, I think, through the public comment that it belongs with the ad hoc committee, and staff will be able to forward those to the entire committee as those come through. So I think that's one way we could certainly quickly address that and allow that to happen right away.
Can I just make a suggestion when you do that? Is to, when the meeting is called to order, to make sure that that the public is reminded of that. Because as you could see, she had lots of questions, and you can I wrote them down, but you can see, like, if you listen to them, she had them at different points. So she were able to kind of just be emailing while she's doing that. It would be a lot easier for her to get a response. So if Aisha or you, Mayor Kayer, could just make sure that that gets reminded each time so folks know.
And can we just try to confirm with Maggie that she's heard this part of the discussion and ask her to email? Dennis, can you bring her, or Dale, can you bring her?
Yep, she's coming back. There she is.
Yep, here I am. Sorry, wow, there's a lot of background noise. Sorry. That sounds perfect. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I was breaking up. I will email my comments and questions, etc., and try not to make it go too long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maggie, it's fine. My kids have been in the background muted the whole time. We're out here doing this together.
Dennis, I'll get that email address linked to the page for this tomorrow morning.
Awesome. Okay. So, did we say anything about changing the flip-flop in the training? We did that. Did we training and the what is it? Duty number 2 with duty number 3, or are we okay? I'm just saying it because of the nature of the conversation. I don't want to skirt over that either.
I saw a lot of nodding when I brought up the possibility of going right to training. Dennis, do you see any issues with that? Do you have enough staff time to put together some stuff? I'm understanding you may not be able to get it all together by the next meeting.
I think from the city standpoint, yes, I'm confident. I would just look for the chief. I would look for the chief to probably chime in and make sure he's comfortable with moving that up. But again, just for the next meeting. But I think that from the city, overall city training and everything that we were going to cover there, that I'm not concerned from the city side. Chief, do you have any concerns?
From training, that's fine. I'll be prepared.
Okay.
And I'll get the policies and stuff, kind of that goes along with it. It's going to be the same format. I'll kind of try to condense it in a PowerPoint, and I'll give you folks the stuff ahead of time, or Dale will give it to you.
Awesome. Okay. Do we have to do anything officially for that to happen? No.
No. The next agenda will come to you, and if you have any issues with it, then we can suggest changes. So I think now's just waiting for a motion to adjourn, if that's what you're thinking.
I'm looking for one.
I'll motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
Second that.
All in favor? Hands raised, yes. And a wave good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.